With the EU Parliament elections at hand, I'd like to report a little bit about what's happening with the Italian parties that I talked about in two of my videos before, and Julius Caesar Mussolini running for the Brothers of Italy party. Fox News reported yesterday that fascist symbols and rhetoric were on the rise in Italian EU votes. And one of the things that they talked about in their article was in Milan. It said, "Honor to Mussolini," read the banner, unfurled steps away from the Milan piazza where the fascist dictator's body was hung upside down in 1945 by partisans after his summary execution. That this was the eve of the 74th anniversary of Italy's liberation from Nazi fascism was not lost on the leader of the group of soccer hooligans with the banner, as he gave the straight-arm fascist salute. The next day, Italy's president, premier, and defense minister attended April 25th Liberation Day commemorations in the capital, but hardline Interior Minister Matteo Salvini, the xenophobic, Eurosceptic political leader many believe can unite Europe's populist right, stayed away, a move that critics said gave a strong signal to far-right sympathizers ahead of European elections. Not since Benito Mussolini's ignominious fall after failed attempts at making Italy a colonial power that gave Hitler the upper hand in their axis has the executed former dictator's image carried such currency. The perception is growing among Italians that fascism, officially banned as a political movement in Italy but never really vanquished from popular culture or the political fringe, is rearing its head in alarming ways. Fascist salutes, long a public taboo, have made their way out of the hooligan sections of soccer stadiums and into city streets, as demonstrated by a couple of dozen of the Roman football squad, Lazio's historically right-wing and fascist ultra fans on visitors' turf in Milan. Fringe far-right political parties are emboldened to shout fascist slogans and raise one-arm salutes in protests against placing Roma families, a minority persecuted in World War II, in Rome public housing. A publishing house tied to the far-right group Casa Pound was evicted from the prestigious Turin Book Fair following protests, including from the Auschwitz Holocaust Memorial, which threatened to boycott the event. The SWG polling agency says 71% of Italians believe it is important to combat the return of Nazi and fascist ideology in Italy, up from 65% just 2 years ago. 2/3 believe it's important to repress those who incite fascism, up from 60% in 2017. In reality, the entire history of fascism is a problem that remains open in Italy because we have never examined ourselves on what this history says about us. Something Italians do not want to do, said Guido Calderon, a right-wing expert. So what they're hoping to do is, in this EU Parliament election, win as many seats as they can, because their whole goal, they said, was to strengthen this right-wing coalition and create this alliance that's new with a few of the other countries that I mentioned before. And Politico reported that Macron makes a last-ditch appeal to young voters in the EU campaign. In a YouTube chat, French president outlines vision of federation of nation-states. In the EU Parliament elections that are scheduled for Sunday, we have it predicted that Italy, Poland, and France will witness the biggest Eurosceptic gains. Eurosceptics is European political doctrine that advocates disengagement from the European Union. Matteo Salvini has told Jean-Claude Juncker he plans to change Europe. Meanwhile, it has emerged Italy will actually have more members of the European Parliament than Britain has now, once the UK eventually quits the bloc with the Brexit. The elections are being held across the continent, with Italians going to the polls on Sunday. Mr. Salvini, who is the country's interior minister of Italy, as well as leader of the League, told Italian television station Rai 3, "You do not need to be a genius to know that League will most likely be the first party in Italy. This government will continue until 2023. On Sunday we vote to change Europe. I want to go to Europe to defend our products made in Italy, our entrepreneurs, our workers," Salvini said. And if you recall, the League Party was the one that I told you had the winged lion on the shield of the knight, where they were holding up the sword in one hand. So it was written in the news May 20th. On Monday, Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini broke into a furious rant condemning European leaders Jean-Claude Juncker, Emmanuel Macron, and Angela Merkel. While speaking in Warsaw, Poland, Mr. Salvini broke into an enraged speech criticizing European leaders who he believed had betrayed Europe with their EU influence. He added that he considered them to be extremists, while noting that there were no far-right supporters in the crowd, but people with a desire for common-sense politics. During his speech, he said, "We are happy to leave the ghosts and fears of the past to others." He says the extremists are those who governed Europe for 20 years in the name of precariousness and poverty. He says, who betrayed Europe? Who betrayed one of the most beautiful dreams hypothesized by the Founding Fathers? The Europe of nations and people of which de Gasperi, de Gaulle, and Margaret Thatcher talked about. He says this Europe was betrayed by the elites and powers who occupied this Europe in the name of finance, of multinationalists, of money and uncontrolled immigration. The Angela Merkels, the Emmanuel Macrons, and the George Soroses and the Jean-Claude Junckers, he said. Despite voting to leave the European Union, the UK is to take part in the European elections Thursday, which was yesterday, May 23rd. Nigel Farage's Brexit Party, which advocates leaving the European Union, is expected to win over 30% of votes. As I'm reading this, my little bunny showed up and is sitting next to me. Little bunnykin. Hi, angel girl. Are you listening? Such a good girl. Beloved of God, aren't you? I love you, honey. Love you, bunnykin. ABC.net.au News says the ghost of Benito Mussolini lingers as far-right popularity surges in Italy, right at the time of the EU Parliament elections. Here's the picture of Julius Caesar Mussolini just a few days ago. Now, how does he play into this election? It says, but now arguably the nation's most powerful politician in Italy, the charismatic Interior Minister Matteo Salvini of Italy, is helping resurrect Mussolini's image and ideology to court far-right voters. Although Italian fascism inspired Adolf Hitler's own violent brand of nationalism, and despite Italy's disastrous entry into World War II, Mussolini's legacy is polarizing. To an outsider, it may be surprising, but for many Italians, Mussolini and fascism are not just palatable. Experts say they're fast becoming fashionable. How does a nation once left in complete ruin by a fascist dictatorship now find itself a vanguard for far-right populism in Western Europe? Skipping down in the article, it says, Italians forget that they had 20 years of brutal dictatorship. Ruth Ben Gayat, a professor of history and Italian studies at New York University, told the ABC. Ignorance is helpful to the right. And then there's a picture of Matteo Salvini, and it says, Matteo Salvini and Mussolini have much in common. This article states, anti-immigrant and Eurosceptic parties are riding a wave of anti-liberal sentiment across Europe and could hold as many as 35% of seats in the EU Parliament after today. At the helm of Europe's lurch to the right is Italy's energetic, social media savvy Interior Minister Matteo Salvini, known to his followers as the Captain. Mr. Salvini markets himself as the antidote to Europe's failed liberalism and is now the most powerful exponent of far-right populism on the continent. In the space of only a couple of years, his Northern League Party, the one that has the winged lion as their emblem, has transformed from a northern secessionist party into an anti-immigrant, pan-European nationalist movement, and while far from outright extolling the virtues of fascism, his seductive brand of far-right politics is tapping into Italy's rich vein of Mussolini nostalgia. And now remember, I told you in my other videos that their goal is to create this alliance after they get in and are elected, and then this alliance, they want to eventually move the headquarters of the EU to Rome, to have that as their capital of the EU. And so that's why they're stating that they want to change the EU, and that when they get in, everything in the EU will change. When, earlier this month, Mr. Salvini addressed a crowd from a balcony where Mussolini once stood and watched the execution of 4 partisans in 1944, the symbolism was glaring. Salvini has been able to channel Mussolini, and they have much in common, Dr. Ben Ghiat said. He uses social media like Mussolini did, newsreels. He builds emotional bonds at rallies. He neutralizes his enemies through humor. And then it shows people in the public, and it says there's almost a sort of fascist hipster now. Then the article talks about the illegal immigration, but I want to skip to this part. Italy's plethora of neo-fascist groups have been emboldened by Mr. Salvini's platform of Italy for Italians, a mantra which echoes of Mussolini's nationalism. So pervasive and normalized is fascist symbolism in Italy become, Mr. Jones even suggests it's become very fashionable. It's not just political, it's cultural. They have clothing lines, barbers, tattoo shops, parachute clubs, football clubs. There's a whole sort of movement to it. And it's said that Silvio Berlusconi brought fascism to power. And there he is smiling for the camera. Skipping down a little further, it says Silvio Berlusconi is so important for the contemporary right all over Europe. He brought neo-fascism to power. Importantly, he broke a taboo of shunning fascism in mainstream politics, Dr. Ben Ghiat said. Australian reports that Mr. Salvini says, "We'll be among the first parties in Europe and the music is going to change," said Mr. Salvini, who's predicted to win about 24 of Italy's 73 European Parliament seats on Sunday local time. Salvini has promised a Trump-like revolution against Brussels' spending rules. In front of hundreds of fans, the Italian showed that he's relishing the role as he claimed, "We'll close the ports, not only in Italy, but in the whole of Europe." So tomorrow's the big day to find out what happens with the Italians in the EU Parliament elections, and France, Germany, and all of these groups that are coming up against each other and competing, I guess I should say. Since Mr. Salvini and the far-right parties of Italy plan to change Europe and move the headquarters of the EU Parliament to Rome, that's what their eventual plan is. It's interesting how this will fulfill Bible prophecy of a revived Roman Empire. And so that's why I'm reporting on this today, and just wanted to update you on what's going to be happening tomorrow. So we'll keep our eyes open for what happens.